Good morning. Just wanted to share something started in Colossians this morning and just notice something that I think is really, really important to us. And here's Paul writing the church, and he is just kind of kicking it off, and he really kicks it off with a prayer and just a greeting and what he's heard about them, how much he loves them. And in verse 9, he says, "We have not ceased to pray for you, asking that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so as to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing to him, bearing fruit in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might for all endurance and patience with joy." And then later on, down in the same chapter, he talks about the preeminence of Christ. And he says in verse 28, "Him, Christ, we proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, that we may present everyone mature in Christ. For this I toil, struggling with all his energy that he powerfully works within me." And it just really stuck out to me. Here we see just this, and I wrote over here on the right, we see the heart of a great disciple maker, right? We see Paul praying, walking, proclaiming, warning, teaching, toiling, and struggling. All of these are words that I picked out of these several verses. And I said, to what end? So, what's the purpose of all of these things that Paul is doing? And he gives us a clue, so as to, verse 10, and then later he says, that we may, which is where, there in verse 28. So as to, that we may. These are purpose statements, and they make very clear Paul's intention. He's doing this for the purpose of their growing up and maturing in Christ. He wants them to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. And what does that look like? Well, verse 10 says that they should be, what? Bearing fruit, right here, bearing fruit and increasing in the knowledge of God. So these two things go hand in hand, increasing in knowledge of God and bearing fruit. So I thought about immediately James, and two times James in James chapter 1 and James chapter 2, he talks about, in James 1, I went back and looked, he talked about don't just be a hearer of the word, but be a doer. And then very famously, which everybody knows about, in chapter 2, he talks about faith without works is dead. So it's this faith, it's this growing knowledge of the Lord, and it's the working out of that knowledge. So increasing in knowledge, but also bearing fruit. And that's what it looks like to walk in a manner worthy of the Lord. You're increasing in knowledge, but also walking it out in practical applications. And I just said this progression in the faith should give us strength to endure what comes at us with this life, with patience and joy, which he talks about right here. Right? Paul would give his life, and he did give his life, to present these people mature in Christ, not as babies. And it made me think back to the church in Corinth, how he said, I couldn't address you as spiritual, but I had to address you I couldn't address you as spiritual and mature in Christ. I had to address you as like babies in Christ, because you were still fleshly. You were carnal Christians. You were infants. You couldn't have meat. You needed milk. And so my prayer for myself and for you is, God, give me a heart like Paul's. Give me a desire for maturity in my life and also in my family's life. Give me a passion to see other men, as a part of my ministry, grow up in you. And so that's my prayer this morning for myself, for you, as we are men on a mission, or desire to be men on a mission. God, show us what that looks like. Give us strength, give us endurance, give us faith, give us an increasing knowledge of your glory, of your gospel, so that we would be good stewards of what you've given us, first to our families and next to the men that you have entrusted to us. In Christ's name.